So, you know, in the fact that I'm being like born and bred into the situation, I want to already have 3,000 points of Seraphon, right? Let's say that's what I want, right? Then it's probably fine, right? But what's actually happening, right, is that I am buying these Seraphon models, and then I'm not going to keep buying more and more and more to keep picking up these editions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting down these books.
Yeah. I'm too tired to formulate.
Okay, welcome back to From the Vault podcast. It's your boy Trent.
And it's Dylan. Sorry, I missed that. I'm sorry.
And we're back. We're talking about Age of Sigmar.
Well, kinda. We're talking about Age of Sigmar. We're talking about... Yeah, look, we spoke about Age of Sigmar a little bit last time. We spoke about all the cool models and stuff.
We did. We talked about Adepticon last time. Not just Age of Sigmar, but today we're talking about 4th edition Age of Sigmar and in extension. What, Dylan?
Editions in general.
Editions in general.
Are editions still a thing that should be happening?
You might know what Age of Sigmar is, but you might think to yourself, what is an edition and why are we in the 4th of it?
Yeah, so, well, moving into the 4th. We're currently in the 3rd. The way, look, if you're a long-time Games Workshop, Warhammer, like, nerd, you know the joys of editions.
Hang on. If you're in the gaming space at all, you probably know the joy of editions.
Yes.
Like, if you play Dungeons & Dragons, you probably know what editions are.
3.5 to 4th, 4th to 5th, everything changes. Basically, an edition is
Except for war.
Except for war. The way editions work is essentially an entire refresh of rules. Some things may stay, most things will go and get changed up. They can be minor changes, like going from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd to 3.5, which brought in a lot of, I think it amalgamated a lot of skills into single parts, and then again, Pathfinder took that further. Even Pathfinder itself just had an update. They're calling it Pathfinder 2nd Edition Revised.
Yep.
Which is kind of streamlining some of the more nuanced rules around Pathfinder and character creation. But that's really all it is. It's not a big refresh. Typically, when it comes to editions in the Warhammer space, when we talk about Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000, it usually comes with an entire update to how the game works. And particularly in recent years, a complete invalidation of any material from previous editions.
Generally, yes. Mostly written material. Now, Dylan, why? That's the big question.
Yeah.
So we know what an edition is. So as things change, rules need to be updated. But you say we need, and the question is why? Why do we need new editions? What is the reason a game would go, for example, in Dungeons & Dragons? Why would it go from 4th edition to 5th edition?
There's a couple of different reasons. First one really is bloat. As games continue on and have more rules applied, band-aid fixes, they will gain essentially bloat, making it harder for people to get into the game when they're bogged down with nuance. This is also true with things like modules and true with things like
source books that introduce new things like races and characters and classes and artifacts and missions and everything. With all of these games, this bloat comes from the fact that there is a lot as you get towards the end of an edition, but as a game's edition gets older, this starts to really become overwhelming.
Yeah. And look, if you want a really great example to go back and look at, you can look at the last edition of Warhammer Fantasy. That is probably one of the biggest updates to a game in terms of editions, because essentially it killed Warhammer 9. It killed Warhammer Fantasy after Warhammer 9th. And the Warhammer Fantasy 10th edition was Age of Sigmar first.
I thought Warhammer Fantasy ended in 8th edition.
Sorry, ended in 8th. Yeah, sorry, yeah. 9th Age is the update, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, Warhammer 8th.
Wait a minute.
So Warhammer Fantasy 8th was the last edition, and then when they ended that during their End Times narrative campaign, they turned that into Age of Sigmar. So Age of Sigmar 1st edition was a complete rebuild entirely of the game and the factions and the narrative So that's where we've gone from edition changes to
Game
changes entirely.
Because Age of Sigmar was a way for them to completely reboot fantasy. It wasn't like a new edition of fantasy. It was like, we're no longer supporting Warhammer Fantasy. We're now making this new game that you can utilize a lot of these models from because we know you want to use them and we love them as well. And that's the whole point of this. We're making a whole new game built around them.
Yep.
Now,
and the reason they did that was because 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy was so bloated with rules over time, even with edition changes trying to streamline some of those rules, created edge cases that needed to be addressed as well. And it got to a point where accessibility became a major concern.
Correct.
And it came through in, I guess, in sales, but also in player base, where there was an arbitrage of people moving out of the game. And because of that rules bloat and inaccessibility, it was really hard to bring people into the game.
Correct.
So that's the other reason why you might see an edition update generally to games, is that the accessibility is a concern when it comes to teaching new players the game. If you need to bring someone into the game, it's really easy to go, here's a rule book, have a read, start playing. It's harder to go, here's a rule book, and here's the expanded player's guide, and here's the extra class list. Here's the ultimate race anthology.
Here's the online FAQ and errata to these kind of things to make sure it's very clear.
As well, so it does also create it creates a real accessibility problem for people coming into the game.
Yeah,
and that is generally really good reasons to create a new edition. 100%, great reasons to make a new edition. But in a modern age where I want to say, like, we're in a world where product releases are very quick.
Yes.
In the sense of, like, if we take Warhammer, for example, we're getting new product essentially once a month.
Yeah.
For Warhammer. For Age of Sigmar alone, we're getting new product once a month. When it finally gets over here to Australia. In Dungeons and Dragons, I think we're getting new product every 4 months is about the time frame for that, which is okay. But
the scale is also different. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, we will get a lot of content in a small package because it's mostly like rules and words.
It's one book. It's a book with something for everything.
Yeah, it's a trillion things in a book. So we get a lot more in 4 months than we would in Age of Sigmar. Well, than we would get in a month of Age of Sigmar. But yes, we're getting lots of new things that use the game constantly. So it does add layers and layers of rules. And what ends up happening is, and we used an analogy before, but it's if you've ever heard of the Ship of Theseus, it's what we kind of talk about with these kind of editions. It's kind of what you're getting into, where you talk about as they build up and more things get attributed to them, it becomes older things in these rules, whether it be 3rd edition Age of Sigmar, 2nd edition Age of Sigmar, whether it be 8th edition Fantasy. Things start to disappear that existed in the early parts of the game as new things start to show up. And it becomes a case of like, where the editions start and where the edition is now. Is this the same edition that we are in currently? Is the game still fundamentally being played the same way? And are the rules and the archetypes and the models and whatever, is this all the same as it was before? And the answer is very often no. However, the goal of these editions and the goal of these games is never to, or more generally not, I should say, to reduce the playability of these older things. So what ends up happening is they go, well, we need these core tenets to still exist with our game. So we introduce something new to kind of bring those back up to the limelight and make those clear again. So I think that, and I think this is where you kind of get into as well, where I think that it becomes much harder when you are releasing physical product.
Yeah.
And this is true about not just Warhammer models and that kind of stuff, mostly into its rule books. And while it's one thing in a game like Magic the Gathering, which is a physical card game, in a game like Warhammer, which uses physical miniatures, it's much harder to do because those things are literal and they're real. Yeah. For example, Warhammer will often update its base sizes between editions and update its base size with its models to make things either bigger or smaller. That can be a very difficult thing to justify doing because it genuinely requires people more often than not to clip their models off of their bases and put them on new bases, which for a lot of people is just not going to happen. These are artistic pieces they work very hard on. Yeah. Often their bases are very fundamentally like designed into the miniatures. Sometimes the miniatures are actually pinned down to the bases, or sometimes they're just like gorilla glued on there. It's very hard to take them off.
Sometimes the miniatures come with scenic bases with their own now no longer apply.
Exactly.
So you have to go and buy a whole new base and then deal with the whole process of some minis. If they have sculpted bases,
they'll pin into them.
their feet pin into them and are molded into that base as well. So there's a whole bunch of hobbying.
Sometimes a part of the foot is actually a part of the base.
Yeah.
That's also true. In the case of Space Marines, for example, I just put together the newest hero kill team, and the actual caps of their feet, like the toes of their feet, are the base.
Yeah.
And their heel and their ankle go into and slide into their foot, which then on the base, their toes, they slide in like so as their toes poke out. So in order to make those into real feet is a nightmare. You need to literally cut their feet off and glue new feet on, which is a mess, and most people don't want to do that. That becomes very difficult. However, when it's things like rule books, it is also very difficult to errata those books because they're physical. If people buy a book, you can't go to every person in the world, white out stuff on their page, or ask them to scribble out things on their page or white out themselves and replace those rules. Obviously, you can't do that. You have to create documents that are online or sometimes produced in Warhammer, sometimes in things like White Dwarves or whatever, the monthly magazine they do, but rarely. Usually it's online. And then that'll explain to players that if they read this part of the book, they're to go, oh, this is no longer correct. I need to access this secondary document. Again, we talk about this when we talk about new editions, and we go, when you have to access more and more auxiliary product, you kind of go, this is very overwhelming. Now, when you have a physical rule, that's a problem. But in the year of our Lord 2024, especially in the context of most players entrenched in these games are sometimes terminally online, it becomes strange when, and you're a company like Warhammer, like these companies, and we'll get into Magic's Gathering with Arena and such as well. I'll have a touch on that too with this conversation. But when you have something online as well, and you have an online presence, to not create these living documents online, to not make these documents fully online, so that way, if people have access to them online at all times, you can errata those in real time. And the worst case scenario someone would have to do is if they download, say, a PDF of your book, you just make an announcement saying, download the new PDF. It's free, just download the new PDF. And then it's the same book they always had, costs them nothing extra, and they go, okay, I have this now. Important to mention is obviously the overheads of that. Obviously, if you're a company like Games Workshop who sells $82.99 codexes to your players, that's for every player, that's one less $83 codex you're selling them because those rules are free online. But you're also a company that sells hundreds of dollars of miniatures. So we talk about that when we talk about the logic of that and why that is a very good idea. But here's the point here that I talk about. If you're able to take a document and update it in real time, then is there a necessity for a new edition, right? In the sense that can't you errata and redact and change things in real time and go, well, this is what Warhammer, for example, let's talk about Age of Sigmar. In 3rd edition, you could be like, this is what 3rd edition is. More importantly, this is what Warhammer Age of Sigmar is, and any parts of this game we don't really like, we can adjust and change as the game progresses and grows. We can go, okay, well, this is what we're looking at now. We haven't really talked about this yet or touched on it, but in the new Warhammer edition, in 4th edition, it's actually going to be the greatest fundamental change in all of Age of Sigmar history. They talk about this, right? It's going to be such a fundamental change akin to 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 that you're going to need indexes for all of your $82.99 battle tomes. So all of the books for 3rd edition are going to become redundant, and all of those rules become free indexes online until, of course, their codex is released, in which case that will cost money again. And this is where it becomes a big boiling pot and a big problem as well. We have players who are investing in, again, $80 books Australian when those books become redundant and they don't matter anymore, and they become glorified lore books with a bit of art and some random junk in the back, 20, 30 pages long. Especially in the context of things like the narrative play and such, which people spend a lot of time with.
Yeah, my big thing about it though, too is the whole point of a living document absolutely needs that can happen. We're in an online world now where, I mean, they put out FAQs online and they update those every 3 months. You can do it to everything. But the big thing for me too is looking at, assessing on a game by game basis is, do we really need it? Do we genuinely need this update to 4th edition to Age of Sigmar? Do we need this update to Dungeons and Dragons to go into D&D 1/6th edition? Did Pathfinder need to update to 2nd edition? I'm not even talking about the revise that just came out, which they also did. But did they need to update into 2nd? On a game, I don't want to make a blanket statement and say no game ever needs new editions. That's wrong. I think something like Warhammer 40,000 benefited greatly from edition change because 9th got so bogged down. It's on 10th now, right? I'm not insane, right?
Correct.
Yeah. My mind's fried on that. But yeah. So, I mean, on Age of Sigmar, right? Do you think it needs a 4th edition?
So there's a few questions here, right? The first one is what I talked about earlier where I said defining the need, right? And I'll come back to that in a second. That's kind of like the big question to me that I think is the most to build upon. I think Age of Sigmar 3rd edition is a great game. I think it's fine. I think that the only issue I have with 3rd edition is not resolved by necessarily a greater edition change. What I think that my issues with Age of Sigmar are resolved by important gameplay patches and balance updates, right? Important gameplay patch balance updates. So, and when I say that, I mean that, again, because Age of Sigmar and other Warhammer games like it and other many tabletop games, because they create documents that are physical and they don't want to update them too much, what they'll tend to update outside of like army rule stuff here and there, they won't update war scrolls, they'll tend to update the points values of things. If a model is too strong, they'll make it cost more points. That way you have less models in your army if you want to bring it. If they make a model too weak, they'll make its points cheaper. So now you can bring more of it, or at least it doesn't have as much of a sunk cost when you do put it into your list. There's less opportunity cost for you, so it feels better. The problem with that, though, is that it doesn't change fundamentally how these models work. You have to make more decisions about playing them, but it doesn't change anything. The problem with Age of Sigmar right now, and this is probably going to hopefully see change in the new edition, and we'll see how this goes, is that in a game of conflict and melee combat, melee combat is very black and white. It is very on or off. What I've noticed through my comprehensive gameplay and constant games of Age of Sigmar throughout the last 3 years of 3rd edition is that very many cases it's going to be my unit interacts with your unit and your unit is now gone from the table. It is very rare that my unit will interact with your unit and you're left with a real unit left over. When I say remove the table, I mean you might have only 1 or 2 models left in your 10 model unit, but if you have like 1 or 2 models, it's not going to be impactful. That's essentially been removed from the table for most gameplay purposes. And I'm able to interact with that later on and just deal with it when it becomes a problem, and it's very easy for me to do and I need to commit much to it. However, even more often than that is that whole 10 model unit will be dead. And what Age of Sigmar has...
Usually, sorry, just to comment on that, usually after a battle shock test, they're gone.
They're gone. Units will just die. And that's like, I don't want to say that the game doesn't have enough tanky stuff in it. There's plenty of stuff that can tank hits. There's plenty of stuff that doesn't do a lot of damage. But what bubbles to the top, what becomes the most effective tactic available, or the meta, as most people know it, is that you play things that kill things in one hit so that they kill the thing before they kill you. You don't play the thing that survives getting killed in one hit because they usually don't kill anything. Or if they do, they usually will still get run down by something that's simply designed to kill anything in one hit, regardless of how tanky you are. So you play things that kill anything, and you both hopefully kill the thing before it kills you. That's how things kind of work. It's like wolves in a forest, right? You just kind of poke out and then kill the thing before it interacts with you. And this is a very big problem for Age of Sigmar because it takes away from the fantasy and takes away from the gameplay element of this like constant warfare and this constant battle. It is just like, yes, games become very like swingy in the sense that kind of an army will just run through another army as they lose more and more points, and that army just loses nothing because again, you're killing everything and not losing anything, or you're losing everything and not killing anything, right? Either way, it's very like explosive. So I think that what you can do is you can introduce rules, or in other words, kind of errata rules that say, you know, for example, if units are doing like, there's lots of units that do multiple damage in the game, you reduce a lot of damage by 1. There's lots of units that have a lot of high rend in the game, you reduce all that rend by 1. You do sway-thing changes without taking the entire rule set and turning it on its head, right? Because what ends up happening, at least what I've seen, is that you get this whole rule set changed on its head and then it has its own swathe of problems which you weren't prepared for because you've had to redesign an entire game from the ground up. That's an important point, redesigning an entire game from the ground up. This is where I talked on from the very beginning, where I said defining the need. And the problem is that if a player of a game goes, oh, 3rd edition Age of Sigmar is really bad because of things Trent's outlined, like the killing everything is just too quick, stuff does way too much damage, has way too much rend. Even if people kind of fix that problem, that sour taste is still in your mouth. That sour taste of like, oh, well, I know what the game is, and I know what it's going to become again because it was that once, it can be that again. And they'll build up that stuff again, they'll nerf it all to the ground. You kind of go, it becomes akin to something like League of Legends, where that game will come out, they'll release a champion, it'll be broken, and you kind of have that, everyone just has this kind of unspoken rule of give it 3 months, it'll be toned right down. Like just give it 3 months at most, it'll be toned right down. It's broken now, but it'll be toned right down. That's fine because a champion in League of Legends will cost you a couple of hours of gameplay to buy.
Yeah.
And will usually be, I can just play whatever I want. Whereas to buy models, and we've established this with Kill Team being very expensive.
It costs you a couple of hours of work.
Not only does it cost you many hours of work just to purchase it, it's then many hours of work
to build it,
paint it, get it on the table. So it's going to take you a while. It's going to cost you real money that can be spent on other real things. And then that thing gets nerfed and knocked down. So there's also issues there. So the need ends up being that, forget that, just go, okay, we've seen the problems we've made. We'll go from the ground up and try to fix those problems in this new edition. And then all of those players who don't like 3rd edition Age of Sigmar, but like Age of Sigmar, which is more often than not most of them because they've at least engaged with the game at a core level, they will come back and play again. And you'll get all that revenue, you'll get all that sales. People will want to buy your models again. And that's why Games Workshop doesn't like to buff and nerf models, because they know what it's like to buy models and have them become redundant. You know, for example, if I was playing my Kragnos End of Empires model, which is a well-known model to be like, it just deletes things it runs into. It is designed by definition to kill anything it runs into. I don't see that changing in the new edition, but that's not the point. If that model were to go, oh, its 4 damage profile becomes a 2 damage profile, all of a sudden it would be like very, very bad for its points. It would all of a sudden be very, very inefficient. It's already technically inefficient, but that's not the point. It would become very inefficient for its points. Once that happens, you go, well, I'm not going to play this model anymore. And this was like an $160 investment Australian to buy this model. So they know that's a big problem. And they're like, no. Worst case scenario, we'll just say it's exactly the same as it was. We'll just make it more expensive if we need to. And then we make it more expensive. You can still bring that model. It's still a good model. Everything it did is still the same. However, it's simply less other models you're going to have to bring to your game, which, you know, they also kind of go, well, that's kind of cool too, because you don't have to buy as many models for this cool Kragnos army. So for me, I like Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. I think it's in a great position. But the thing is that I'm also a very flexible person who's okay to go, well, I understand where the game is at and I'm willing to follow and chase where the game is at currently. I was also a person in 9th edition 40k to go, I really like 9th edition 40k. It had its faults. It was a bloated format. It was very hard to get into. I think that can be said the same about Age of Sigmar. But I liked that edition. I didn't think it needed a 10th edition. It benefited greatly from a 10th edition. I think there's a lot of benefit, especially in the overheads for the game, especially for how much they've been making off the game. And I think a lot of people I know nowadays who were disillusioned with 9th now love 10th edition and now in distinction love 40k. But a lot of them, and this is what I was going to get into with 4th edition, a lot of these players I saw that got into 10th edition went, wow, new edition, everything's fixed. That's awesome. I'll get into it. They played a bunch. They got back in franchise. They went, I'm going to play 40k. And now I'll play games with them. And sometimes I'll get that rhetoric come back up where it's like, well, it's not very different, is it? It's like things still kill each other super crazy, and there's like still good models and bad models, and the game still has like a fundamentally almost the same gameplay loop with some changes. But I still want to play it because now I've got myself back into the game. And that's, I think, kind of where this 4th edition is going to go in the direction of, where it's going to be like, we'll get some fundamental changes, and we'll go, I really like this game. It won't necessarily fix the issues with 3rd edition because at the end of the day, strong models will kill things and weak models will not. And that's a thing that will happen in all these games, right? And then people go, but I've committed so much time and energy to get back into this game, I'm going to play it again now.
It's more of a mental reset.
It's a mental reset, exactly.
Reset.
And that almost feels disingenuous, right? Because you can have a mental reset without a new edition, right? By just personally realizing where you're like coming from.
Take a small hiatus.
Like take a small hiatus from the game.
Yeah.
Or
Touch grass.
Yeah.
And more importantly, just have like, you were giggling about what I'm trying to get to, which is basically just like, just have a more comprehensive thought process around where your issues stem from.
No, but I want people to tell me that things are wrong rather than me to realize that I'm the one that's wrong.
Yeah.
No,
It can't be you.
No,
There's
it's not
no
me,
new
bro.
bone splitters, and I'm mad.
Yeah. And that's it.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, from a gameplay perspective for Age of Sigmar 2, I think the writing's kind of on the wall there too, on a couple of the elements they're changing, because like let's talk about the fact that they're saying we're going to invalidate all of the profiles and we're going to have to rebuild them. That to me just screams that something's changing in the profile makeup.
Fundamentally, something greater is changing, yes.
So I would not be surprised personally if in 4th edition we're looking at objective control numbers. Again,
Surely.
Like exactly the same as 40k did with 10th edition, because in the 3rd edition of AOS, they did that, except they just made it blanket.
Yes,
They said everything has one, unless it is a model with more than one. Was it more than one wound?
more than 5 wounds or greater. More than 4 wounds.
Wasn't there another one for things that were 5 wounds or less?
There's heroes.
Heroes.
So it's like it counts as 1, and then heroes count as 2.
2, unless
and
they
then-
have more than 5 wounds or something, or more than 10 wounds.
Yeah, I think it's 1 and then 2 and then 5 it counts as.
Yeah,
So yeah,
1,
then
2,
it's like
5, yeah.
1, 2, 5. So it's like units, heroes, then big things
Then
go
monsters,
1 and then 2 and then 5.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the big sweeping unit profile change.
I would be surprised. They did announce there's going to be universal special rules. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go very much the way of 10th edition and they introduce the universal special rules as well. And they say, this is how things are going to work. It's going to be very 10th edition. They did say in the article, I think the one we actually have up here, they do say in the article that they are, I want to remember the exact terminology, but it says that they have changed how impactful. Hang on, mind if I? Have a look. Sorry, Chad, give me a second. So they mention that it says, I'll read this entire paragraph. It says, on top of all that, because they were just talking about their rules. So Connor, yeah, perfect. So on top of all that, there are modular rules. They've talked about a bunch of the new rules they're adding in. Plenty more opportunities for reactivity in your opponent's turn via an updated system of command points and abilities. So currently in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition was the first edition they really introduced into Sigmar the idea of reacting to your opponent. They gave Unleash Hell a form of like Overwatch, where you go shooting units, charging things at them, redeploy lighting to move out of the way of certain movement, that kind of stuff. Command points abilities and a ton of tweaks and refinements, and this is very important, not least to the double turn, which has been fine-tuned into a knife-edge decision with a clever twist to scoring. Put simply, is the best edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar yet. Now, what's important here is they say, not least to the double turn. Not to say, not at least to removing the double turn. So a core gameplay mechanic, as far as these guys are concerned, is the initiative roll and the ability to take 2 turns in the quick row. I'm excited to see what big change they make to the double turn to make that feel not as oppressive as it does today.
From what I've seen, I remember seeing something about it that basically says they're looking at reducing how many points you can score in a turn if you double turn.
Yes, that makes sense, right? Now, what's interesting though is that when I talked about the issues that I've had with Age of Sigmar, somebody's played hundreds of games, right? Did I mention the scoring?
No.
I really didn't even mention the double turn, to be honest. And that's a whole thing to talk about. Because the problem with the double turn is how lethal things are, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter how scoring is going to happen in the double turn. Because if my 30 bowmen in the Lumineth get 2 turns to shoot into you, if my huge line of spellcasters in my Cruel Boys or whatever I'm playing has 2 turns of casting those massive damages. Seraphon's a great example.
If my War Crusher can charge on the turn during my command phase, kill a squad, then move on to the next one in my charge phase, kill that squad, and then I double turn and can do that all again.
Exactly.
That's what happens.
That's what happens. But none of that's got to do with scoring.
No.
And if you score less, that's only as useful as your opponent has models left on the table. So it'd be an interesting change to see what they mean by this. So we're still talking about 4th edition Age, we're still talking about like the changes they're going to make to the edition and what's interesting about this. They're not showing us enough information for us to really give you any more than that for those listening at home. But those are some changes that's really important to mention. But again, we could have, if there was like Age of Sigmar the game, that was like a document that they made clear was a living document, they were going to update as things change and things need to be updated. This wouldn't be necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the changes they're making as well isn't necessarily changes to say, oh, all this stuff's been introduced to 3rd that's created all these problems. It's like, no, we just think 3rd has fundamental gameplay problems. And it's like, it's interesting to me that they go, we have to go from the ground up. That's interesting to me because it goes like, well,
it's like saying we have fundamental problems without saying we have fundamental problems.
Exactly. Akin to what happened in Warhammer 40,000 from the 7th edition to the 8th edition, where the entire game was demolished and then rebuilt from the ground up, utilizing the same principles. This is what's happening here. However, again, with things like the double turn and stuff sticking around, we can get a little bit looser with that definition for Age of Sigmar. To me, it's like, are you just... and not as massively as it was Fantasy 8th edition to Age of Sigmar, because those are just 2 different games. Is that what's happening here? Are we going to be getting just essentially a new game, but utilizing the same models? Because I find that an edition feels relevant when you're making a new game, which is almost deceptive because you're simply just not making a new edition. You're making a new game and calling it a new edition. When I look at games like, a good example is like Warcry's new edition, I actually don't feel like Warcry's new edition was necessary. I feel like Warcry's new edition was it just brought it up marketing-wise to the limelight and say, if you never tried it, we've refreshed the whole game.
Yeah.
Cosmetic,
Basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a major refresh.
You were saying in the last episode about it being essentially 1.5.
Correct.
Even though it's slated as 2, it's essentially 1.5.
Spiritually.
Which, to me, is classic edition changes for Warhammer, right?
Yes.
We took some things that didn't work in the last edition, we've removed them, we've changed them up, rules are a little bit different. It's going to cause an adjustment to the points, but ultimately not a lot is going to change for your gameplay method. And then I feel like in the last, I want to say around 8 to 10 years, Warhammer has moved to this space of we're going to make fundamental shifts to everything every 3 years,
which is insane.
Which is insane.
You're almost playing entirely new games. Now, 8th to 9th, I think, was, again, not as harsh. I think from 7th to 8th was insane, and from 9th to 10th was pretty large. But
was a huge shift for 40k at that point, especially like even just the relation of like strength versus toughness. That entire thing got moved away in favor of just simplified dice rolls on a profile.
Yeah, AP was an entirely different mechanic altogether. Heroes just, and I should say HQs, just operate entirely differently. Detachments were totally different.
D-strength weapons.
Yep, everything like that. Everything that was even just like the core gameplay loop changed. So that's like almost an entirely different game. But then 8th to 9th was like, no, we're just hashing things out. 8th, 9th was like, we've introduced obscuring terrain pieces. That was like the greatest change to 9th. Now that's a grand kind of, I think that's a bit of a fallacy. But like,
and then added a bunch more stratagems.
Did that kind of stuff. But mostly the greatest change 9th edition really offered was we have streamlined the visual design of these books and the visual design of these rules. They're easier to understand. We've introduced more stratagems to these books. We made codexes more complicated. That was, again, I'll come to that. Codexes are quite more complicated. And we've also introduced types of terrain that make the game like playable at a competitive level, feel better at a competitive level, without you having to make specific terrain that fits the rules that we've already made. Now you can just use any terrain you have at home. You have like aquarium terrain, that's going to work with the rules you've introduced, which was actually freaking brilliant. Now, that's all good and well and fun, but if you really look at that and go, well, couldn't you just introduce terrain options and say these are what we've done to terrain in a document and update that? Yeah. Could you not have just gone, okay, well, we've made, in the middle of the 8th edition, we've updated the Sisters of Battle Codex. We've got the new codex. This is their updated codex. Like, you can just make, this is the thing that's crazy to me, you can just make more codexes in the middle of an edition. It's like Lumineth got two codexes in 3rd edition Age of Sigmar. Lumineth got 2 editions in Age of Sigmar, got 2 codexes, or paddle tomes in that game. That's a thing you can do. So it's not like you need a new edition to justify making a new codex. You can just make a new codex. That's not something you can't do. So it seems like it's almost like, oh, but editions need to exist for all of these things to exist. Almost feels like a bit of like huffing copium, because at the end of the day, that's not true.
Yeah.
This is like correlation. It's like also true that they've got a new edition, which is also why they're releasing new codexes for these books, right? But again, it makes things artificially fresh in order to resell product.
Yeah.
It's almost like
that's the whole...
It's almost like
that's the really frustrating capitalist side of it.
Yes.
Is that it really just means you can tell how close you are to a new edition of Warhammer based on how many codexes or battle tomes are left to be released.
That's it.
And it's not like they're going to keep coming out with new factions.
No, that's right.
But like, also from a lore perspective as well, I think you having editions also presents like a capstone for like, all right, this is the end of season 2, and now we're going into season 3, and we're going to bring over some old characters, but we're going to focus on some new things, introduce some new characters, and just kind of shift the perspective. So we're going to go from Central Perk to Paddy's Pub, you know?
That's really just like narrative marketing, though.
And also, well, I agree with that. I do agree there, but I like the words you just used, seasons, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we need new additions? Do we need gameplay overhaul to happen if we're just going to have a new season of a game?
Well, that's the thing, too, is in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition, seasons were a thing.
They were.
Like, the General's Handbook, they kind of were for a while, where a General's Handbook meant new mission packs for match to play, new points, right? General's Handbooks and the chapter-approved 40k. That's what they mainly meant.
And like general errata as well, right?
And they had some general errata to the rules and to player factions, and army rules and all that. And that's basically the thing. And then in 3rd edition of AOS, they came up with this seasoned pitched battles pack stuff.
Season of War?
Well, the seasons were years, and then there was 1 year, I think we had 2 seasons in a year. Was that Thondia 1 and Thondia 2?
2022 to 2023 and then 2023 to 2024. But they were both like within the same year of 2023.
But within those seasons, they also had the general objectives that you could choose from. They had special rules based on unit types and certain detachments and builds.
And just, they had like static abilities that applied to the level. Like in the most recent General's Handbook was the most fundamental game overhaul, which was like you had things like primal dice to deal with. Wizards became very important because certain objectives like kill wizards get points, have wizards get points. Wizards can only hold objectives. Wizards got unique spells. There were unique things like command traits and artifacts and such. Like it became so much about the realm and so much about the General's Handbook that if you weren't very much competitively up to date with that, you were already falling behind.
Yeah. And the last season before that was having groups of battle line units, I think. Correct, the bodyguards. And like that was it. Like, it kind of feels like they were already doing new editions. Like every
micro
year,
editions.
Micro editions. And I think that's where my issue, when I look at something like Warhammer Age of Sigmar and the messaging that they're currently putting out. Obviously, this is recorded a week or two before this has come out. But the fundamental marketing messaging that they're giving out to it just doesn't line up with what they've been doing for the last 3 years, right? They're talking about that, we've streamlined the game to play. Well, actually, the game's pretty streamlined, and you streamline it further every year when you bring out a new season because you go, well, let's change how this game works. We want to see these kind of units move through, and that creates a bit more of a streamlined play. And we're taking all the rules that we introduced since then in relation to this kind of gameplay loop that we don't want to happen anymore, and we're tossing them out because now monsters are cool, but they don't score you like big objectives or give you big points for doing that kind of stuff like they did in season 1.
To be fair, I will add 2 things. The first one being is that some of those rules from those General's Handbook did bleed into the core rules.
Yes.
So, for example, in one of the books with the heroes and the battle line, they introduced a rule which was akin to the 8th edition and 9th edition 40k rules of Lookout Sir, where you just couldn't shoot characters at their nearby units. In Age of Sigmar, it was, you get -1 hit. So things that were shooting them were still killing them because -1 doesn't fucking matter. You just
there's enough modifiers that you
stacked over the top of it. You didn't care. Now they meant, that's a problem. We're going to fix that. So in one of the General's Handbooks, they went, actually, no, there's just the straight up lookout. So you just can't shoot those models. When that went away, they actually took that rule and siphoned it into the core rulebook, which was smart because it's an important rule. But what's important, right? And I want to just stop on this for a second because it's like, there's a point where it sounds a bit cynical to talk about how it's like, money. It's all about money. But let's talk about the General's Handbooks for a second, about what you just mentioned, which is, so we had, monsters are very important. Okay. And then it was small heroes are very important. Then it was battle line choices with units like heroes nearby them is very important.
Attachment builds are important.
And then we had wizards are important. Let's just say those 4. I think there's also like 2 between there or 1 between there. I can't remember, but doesn't matter. So that was the point there, right? And they went, let's say I'm playing a Seraphon faction, for example, okay? And you can't see where I'm going with this. Let's say I'm playing Seraphon, for example, right?
Big on monsters.
So I started my game by going, okay, I'm going to play, like Seraphon, I'm going to go to some events around my local game store. I'm going to play with some friends. We want to play the most recent General's Handbook. Okay, so I have an old one on Carnosaur. Super important, very cool, love him. I got a Scarvator on Carnosaur, a Skink Oracle and Troglodon. That's good. I got some big monsters. Let's get myself like 2 Stegodons. Cool, I've got some stuff. I'll get myself a couple of battle line choices just to fill out my army that I need to. Some Pterodons for some like collapsing and some stuff, and maybe I'll get a Slan Priest in the back line. And then monsters became less relevant, right? And we came to small heroes being very relevant. And I go on my list and I go, I'm like, I don't have any of those. So I go to my local friendly game store and I go to my Games Workshop and I get myself a Skink Star Priest. I'm like, all right, well, they're having a Slan. That's pretty good. So I get myself a Skink Star Priest. I got myself an all 1 on foot. I'm like, I can go to my Saurus Warriors, right? I already have my 2,000 point army and I'm hitting 2,300 points with a couple of new models, right? Again, you see where I'm going with this. Then those became less relevant. And now all of a sudden, and I had to take out stuff like Stegodons, right? Because I had to take out models on my list to make it 2,000 points. So then I was like, okay, well, now I go over to the
Battle lines.
The
so
battle line,
important.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's being very important. I'm like, okay, well, now I need lots of battle lines. Let me get some skinks involved. So I buy a couple of boxes of skinks. I have like 40 or 60 skinks, right? Like, that's really good. Okay, so now I take out some other models. I've got a bunch of skinks. And then in the next edition, look at that. Let me say that. The next General's Handbook, now Wizards are really important. I'm like, well, I have a skink oracle. I have a star priest. I have a slan. Is that kind of enough? I don't think that's enough. I need a little bit more spell casting. So I got myself like a Lord Croak, right? Because it's a very important model for the slan army. And I'm like, all right, cool. So my slan army went artificially from 2,000 points to easily like 2,800, 3,000 points because shifting was happening. I needed to buy an extra 1,000 points of models just to keep up with the core gameplay of these Generals Handbooks. And I could say that exact same story about Nighthaunt. I could say the exact same story about Lumineth. I could say about anything. Even Ostiarch Bone Reaper is a good example of me following along this line of going, well, now I need more Mortec. Well, now I need more Bone Shapers. Well, now I need more Putrefacts. Like, that's a sub-faction, Trent, not a unit. But anyway, that's the point. Now I need more of whatever. So you go, okay, like these General's Handbooks, because they were so blatant in what type of unit was very important, it made you want to skew into that type of unit very heavily. So as the edition changes, and I was being very generous as well in my Seraphon list, being like, what can I do that's really like, flexible, which is not very good. That list I talked about, the very first list for the go, I probably just wanted more Bastillons and Stegodons. I probably didn't want to go into anything else. Yeah. I'm being very generous by saying I filled out some battle line choices. I could just go Thunder Lizards and I have battle line choices in Stegodons, so I don't need those extra models. So then I'd be buying more and more and more. This could have easily been a 4,500 point army, which is like, easily $3,000 plus. Easily, by the way. At this point, by going so deep into these General's Handbooks, which is what a company like Games Workshop wants me to do.
Yeah, but like I on the flip side of that, would you prefer to have spent that 1,000 points buying units over the course of 3 years, or would you prefer to spend that 1,000 points to update your army immediately upon a new edition after those 3 years? Like, what's better financially from a customer base?
Buying a second army 1,000 points worth and building up a new army. That's the most fundamentally like efficient thing for me to do. Having another option for me to play to have something fun. Like, again, if I'm playing something like Seraphon, right? Why can't the General's Handbooks be designed around just different missions and different things? The meta will shift. I understand the meta will shift, and like what becomes very effective will change, and maybe points will change. Stegodons will be the best unit in my army, for example, and then I want to change them. But when monsters are no longer like viable as like a whole army, I am feeling forced to change. And the Games Workshop wants me to buy specific other models. Now they're the most viable models artificially. It doesn't feel like these things are happening because the effective tactic is changing and people are coming up with more ideas. No, it's like Games Workshop says, these aren't important, these are important.
Yeah,
and I need to screw into them.
But what I'm getting at though is like, would you, let's say like over the course of that, would you prefer to have spent that 1,000 points over those 3 years? Like what I'm trying to get at is the financial strain on a player base and a customer base, from my understanding, would be much more significant if these kind of elements happened at a new edition.
I agree,
because,
right?
I mean, like from personal experience, I was around in the eras of the minor adjustments to Warhammer like rule books, and that still created fundamental shifts in armies.
Oh yeah, that's still true. And okay, so to answer your question specifically, right? To answer your question specifically about like, do I want to spend money a lot during a change of edition or over the 3 years? Obviously, it's over the 3 years, right? Obviously, I want to be able to like trickle out that money, and that just makes things more sense, right? But these things aren't happening like one or the other.
Yeah,
these are both happening,
it's
right?
Both right now.
And if, and again, this is let's like sprinkle sparkle over, right? If we're talking about the conversation where I'm a Seraphon player, I now have like 3,000 points of Seraphon. I pretty well bought everything. And then there's an edition shift. I don't care. I pretty well have everything because the game has like kind of molded me to do this. It's kind of taught me to buy pretty well everything I can over the course of this entire edition so that when the 4th edition strikes, I don't feel like I'm being left out on the lurch because these other units, and we're not even talking about the fact that units become redundant altogether. We're not talking about the fact they delete units from books, that's a whole thing. And we're not even getting to that yet.
I miss you, Doom of Melantai.
Yeah, we're not even getting into there, right? So, in the fact that I'm being like born and bred into the situation, I want to already have 3,000 points of Seraphon, right? Let's say that's what I want, right? Then it's probably fine, right? But what's actually happening, right, is that I am buying these Seraphon models, and then I'm not going to keep buying more and more and more to keep picking up these editions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting down these books.
Yeah.
If I get to the Wizards edition, I'm going to go, far out. I don't want to buy a bunch of Wizards of my Seraphon. I like my army. I'm going to play it. It's going to lose and lose and lose because I'm just not playing what the game wants me to play. And I'm going to put it down. And then Games Workshop is going to see its numbers of players go down and down and down and down. It's going to go, this edition really isn't working. We got to fix this stuff because this obviously is a problem with the game as a whole. It's not a problem with the fact that we're overwhelming our players with this.
Yeah, that just like created such a frustrating moment in my mind where the entire decision to create a new edition is because they just missed the ball on their current
That's what I'm saying.
season.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So what ends up happening, that's what I was saying, what could have happened, right, is that throughout those generals handbooks, they weren't focused on specific unit types or specific types of play. They were just like, here's a bunch of new missions that are generally playable by every faction.
They just play
These are general different rules. Like, here, sometimes the objective markers move. Sometimes they explode. Sometimes they disappear. Like, just do that. It's not the end of the world to be like, it's not artificially forcing people to buy models. Now, obviously, as a Games Workshop executive, you go, but I want people to buy models. So if I can do that artificially, that's fine. Yeah. If people don't buy models, what are we going to do? You know what I mean?
How will our business survive?
How will it survive? And it's almost like you release these Dawnbringer Chronicles with brilliant models inside all the time. And people just want cool models. I bought Trug on the spot, and there's a Belthanos on the shelf that I'm holding myself away from. But, you know
what I would actually prefer? I would prefer that they just do a new General's Handbook and they release an optional purchase of new battle tomes in the sense of just to get the added unit profiles from everything. Like, honestly, I need a new battle tome for Auric Warclans because the Ard Boys got an update for the entire model range, and then now we've got more Grunters and Gore Grunter detachments focused around that as well. So,
which is a free PDF, Dylan.
Which is a free PDF.
Can you imagine?
But it would be nice to have it as a book as well. So
now that's an important point. I like Connor. Go ahead. He's just arcing up.
I just wanted to come in with an alternative proposal for how they could do things instead of going a new edition. Because, like, there are people out there who play like, oh, BattleTech hasn't had any changes and blah blah blah. So if the core rules of an edition are stable, and you could build off that in more of a living model. I kind of like the idea, and I could see them doing this down the line, maybe when like consumer, trends change a bit. They put the core rule book behind the Warhammer Plus subscription, but you still have to pay for your PDF battle tomes, $20, $25, $30, whatever it is, but obviously cheaper than a physical release. Like, they could still release the physical codexes and battle tomes.
No,
then they can errata those PDFs in real time.
Yeah.
So
that's like akin to what the Malifaux app does, right? Now that's a much smaller game, but the Malifaux app is like, oh, we errata all the cards, and on all the card boxes it says check for errata on the Malifaux app, right? Malifaux app is also free. That's a different conversation to have. And I also think that you're right in the sense that you should put the core rules on there, put all the army rules on the app. I don't even think people should buy their PDFs. What I think it should be is it should be just you just bump the subscription level up. Yeah. You just make the subscription level, make it like, $70 a month, $69.99 a month. Yeah. Right, month, Trent, Jesus Christ, a year. Yeah. I mean, say $6.99 a year, and that's like the cost of the app, and then that's how much people are paying to access all of the rules of the game. Literally everything, $6.99 a year, or something close to that, Australian, of course, close to that. And then they go, and this is what I want to talk about before, and I'll let you come back to this in a second. What I want to talk about very quickly is like, that's something that always kind of gets me about this, right, is that people do like books. Yes. Especially those people who are involved with this game. I bought the Kroot Hunting Pack, and I bought that 70% for Kroot models. I read the Kroot rules. They're bad. I like Kroot. I like them visually, and I like modeling. So I'm going to assemble my Kroot really soon and get them all onto the table ready and play with some friends, right? However, I didn't buy Kroot because I was like, oh, I really, really love Kroot so much. I'm so excited. What I really bought that box for was the alternate cover limited edition codex. It's really pretty. It's got these gorgeous, like, blue cobalt, like, metallic slices all over it.
The Tau Codex.
With the Tau Codex.
Which isn't even out yet either.
No, I've looked at it. But other than that, yeah, it's not even out yet. But it has like these blue, beautiful like stripes on it with like the Tau text and like this cobalt blue, like kind of metallic sheen to it. They look gorgeous, right? People love books. I love books. I love reading through that lore that it comes with too. I think books are great. There's nothing wrong with that. However, again, it's this artificial nature of it. It's when I am forced to buy this book to have access to my rules. Because again, and this is what we talk about as well, we're kind of going away from the edition discussion for a second, but like, in a world of online connectivity, I have the PDF of all the rules.
Yeah.
I have the rules of the whole Tau Codex on my phone. Should I? I don't know. I don't know what the
Legally, probably not.
Probably not. But of course I do, because for every 300,000 people that read this book, 30,000 of them hate that they had to buy the book.
Yeah.
So, those 30,000 people, if even one of those 30,000 people post the book, pictures of it to Reddit, you have it.
You know what the craziest thing is?
300,000 people have it.
Craziest thing is, I have both the Maggotkin and the Auric Warclanes battle tomes as PDFs on my phone and on my computer, so that I can look at them up whenever I want. But I still have the books.
Yeah,
like,
because you like the books.
I like the books. Having that thing that game implemented in front of you while you're playing as well is also significantly easier and faster for me to move through than.
Sure, okay, but take a step back, right? Because you don't have to do this. You can upload them to any kind of notepad document and print those out. You don't need a book to do that. If you wanted it to be like professional, you can laminate them and take them to Officeworks, put them in a binder if you need to, but you can print those out. Right? Now, it's because you like the filigree of the book. You like the aesthetic of the book. You like the rules and the lore and the art. The book is cool. There's nobody saying the codexes aren't cool. It's when it's artificially forced for you to buy. Now, this is also true about the edition. Those core rules will come out as like a quick start PDF, surely, or like quick start something. There'll be like a YouTube video showing you how to play.
And they won't even have all the rules in them either.
And that's the important part. They won't have all the rules in them, because the more comprehensive rules you need to buy on the book and get the book and buy the. You know what? Again, the core rulebook won't come out immediately. What will come out first as is a big starter box thing with 2 armies in it. It'll have like the Stormcast versus the Skaven with the book in it.
Actually, they did it in the latest edition of AOS. The book came out at the same time as the army sets.
I remember it differently, but I might be wrong. I thought that because we had the extended version.
Don't get me wrong. The army books were heavily allocated.
Yeah, well, there you go. Look at that. So like, we had 3.
Sorry, the core rule books. Yeah,
we had like 3.
They were extremely
So I think
allocated.
we didn't have any on the shelf.
No, we didn't.
No, but we had boxes.
We had lots of the army sets.
We had lots of Dominion on the shelf.
Yeah,
but like, look at that. We're back to the accessibility argument, aren't we? If I go into a game shop and there's no core books and there's only Dominion box, how am I going to get the core book? Unless somebody's uploaded a PDF online, there's a little wahapedia.ru page with all the rules on it that somebody's just like uploaded. And
I might have to blank that out.
Yeah, well, whatever.
I'm sure they know about it.
I'm sure they know
to a
about
degree.
it. So like, if you like, I don't care if you like it, do whatever you want. But like, if there's some way to get access to it, right? By the way, we were playing Kill Team on that same sneaky little website that you don't want me to talk about. And it's formatted.
I don't want you to talk about it.
It's formatted better.
It is formatted way better.
It's formatted way better.
I have a rule on my gun, and I touch the rule, and a box pops up with the rule of the weapon.
Yeah.
It's formatted brilliantly.
If they literally just be like, hey, GW go, like, we like the team, we like the design of this, can you just bring it in-house?
Yes.
And we'll pay you. Like, that would be the smart move.
I mentioned that I have the PDFs of Auric and all that too. I also use the website for
everyone
generally
does.
like
great.
Artifacts and special abilities.
Yes.
It's just
Everyone does. And you know what I use it mostly for? My opponent's rules.
Yeah.
Yes.
I use it mostly
Oh
when
my God,
opponent,
yes.
my opponent goes, they go, oh, and it's on 3s. Yeah. I go, oh, let me just check that. Like, really, I'm like, I don't trust you anymore. Like that kind of like look. Like, or like sometimes somebody will go like, oh, the spell goes off on this and it does this. And I'll be like,
does it really?
Way, what?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And sometimes I go, ooh. But sometimes, like, again, a really important thing. Here's a good example. I was playing a Crusade game very recently, and I was looking at the Leagues of Votann with a friend. My friend Matt was playing Leagues of Votann. He's having a great time. He goes, I killed your thing, and I get 3 command points. And I'm like, oh, dude, it's actually your turn too, so I get 2. And he goes, of course, that's right. A person sitting near the table goes, no, he gets 3. And I'm like, nah, dude, it's my job. He gets 2. And I go back to play, and he goes, no, he gets 3. And I'm like, I look over the guy, I'm like, okay, sure. And then Matt goes like, do I? And I'm like, no, just keep playing. And then he goes, this person with us, he goes, yeah, I just had a check and it says that he gets 3. And I'm like, So I pull up my phone. I'm like, I'll just check it as saying, give me something. Looking through, and I read like it's like if this happens by your turn 2, not during your turn 2, but by your turn 2, you get 3. But during your turn 2, you get 2. I'm like, so actually, no, you're interrupting us, and that's not true. And they go, oh, I misread that word. I thought it said during, not by. And I'm like, simple mistake. I wasn't mad at this guy. I was like, hey, simple mistake. I mean, I was mad for interrupting our game he wasn't a part of. That's like his own conversation.
Yeah.
But a simple mistake. But I'm like, it was so easy to access. Even though, yes, technically with PDFs, you're flicking through pages, whatever. Again, you know what I do? I screenshot parts of my PDF, and I have a gallery where I can go, yeah, this, and I can just go, whoop, 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 and like bring up whatever I want, because it's like, I just know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for years. But like, there's lots of ways to make it accessible. And on a mobile device, it's incredibly easy to do, right? And again, I still have
Except
the books.
the only way to do it now that isn't official. So the only way to do it now that is official is terribly inefficient.
Terribly inefficient.
Oh.
Like, you know what's actually, can I just say, by the way, I don't know if you're saying, let me translate what you're saying. You're saying the Warhammer app sucks. Is that what you're saying?
I haven't used the Warhammer. I'm saying the PDF.
Sorry,
I've done EPUBs.
So
PDFs.
the EPUBs suck. That's terribly inefficient, right?
Yeah.
But you know what's funny? And you're about putting it all on the Warhammer app. The Warhammer app's really good. Like, just like Waha, by the way, just like that website that we're using, the Warhammer app has the same kind of integration. You're still able to click on rules and go different things. It's not as nice as Waha, I think, personally, because it's not built with as much love, in my opinion. It's built mostly for money.
For corporate overlords.
But it's a good app, and it gets the job done. It just doesn't have all the fucking rules on it. It just doesn't have the rules on it, because these games do not want to go to a living system. They want to keep up this fallacy that the game needs to be updated at edition and codex basis.
Consumption.
Endless consumption. Buy the books, buy the rules, buy the books, buy the models, buy the rules. We were lucky that the Iron Jaws came as a PDF supplement.
I know.
Yeah.
I was so amazed at that.
We were lucky that they didn't release a battle tome.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how messed up that is? We were lucky they didn't release a battle tome. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it would have been completely useless by now.
Your one you'd have, you'd chuck out.
In the second edition, they did have 2 Auric Warclans battle tomes too, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah.
They had 2. No, they had 3, right? No, 2. So they didn't have Crew Boys. Yeah, they had 2.
No.
The Iron Jaws and the Beast and the
No. They had an Iron Jaws, and then it became an Auric Warclans battle tome.
Yes, but before the Auric Warclans battle tome, there were 2 battle tomes, because the
Bone Splitters
were their own battle tome.
Did they have their own?
They did.
Their own hardcover battle
Yes,
tome.
they're their own. I know. I versed it plenty of times. As a
My God!
As a Nighthaunt player, by the
I played
way,
Iron Jaws. Sorry.
as a Nighthaunt player who played against a friend of mine, Bevan, who exclusively played Burning Tattoos Bone Splitters, and had his book in front of him showing me that his rule was I ignore ethereal, which was only on my models in the entire game. I can promise you, I shattered my teeth, gritting my teeth at the Bone
There
Splitters
was. Oh my
hardcover
God.
book. So he had that exact book, first edition Age of Sigmar Bone Splitters book that existed for the first year of second edition.
Yeah. I remember that cover vividly.
So there were, again, books and books and books and books. Buy books, get rid of them. Buy books, and that's the worst part, right? The lore doesn't change so extremely that you're getting a new experience out of every codex.
No.
And most people who are buying these aren't buying them for the lore. I'm sorry, I love my lore in my towel, but I don't always read the lore.
And if you've been a long-term player, like, I mean, again, I'm talking from experience from the older editions of Warhammer. It was of 40k back in the uni days, where essentially once the new edition came out and you got your new codex, all you really gave a shit at that point, if you've been playing for more than 2 or 3 years,
you knew the lore.
It was the last third of the book. That's all you really gave a shit.
Because you know the lore.
You know the
it's
lore.
Your favorite army.
Yeah.
Like, it's your favorite army. I could tell you so much about the Tower Empire lore. We could do a whole 2 podcast episodes about Tower Empire lore. I love the Tower Empire. I don't need to know, like, what the 3rd expansion sphere is for the 4th or 5th time in my life, because I know what that is. Now, there might be some new stuff sprinkled in here and there. There is usually some new updates here and there, so it's good to kind of go through. But also, you've read the lore once in the new book you get. You've read it once it's done. You then access those that last third of the book over and over again every game.
Do you think there is... Okay, this congratulations, Games Workshop. We're going to give you some capitalism. Do you think there is a world where people would pay for a reduced price for a PDF/online version that is literally just the unit profiles and rules?
Data cards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Data
Right?
cards, yeah.
That's why they released data cards, Dylan.
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
There you go.
You've
right
done
there
it.
and there, they released data cards. Now, data cards don't have detachment rules
Yeah.
in
Data
40K.
cards
It's just
suck.
data.
Hey, no. Data cards are All right, Games Workshop. All right, you might want to rock this one. Data cards are purposefully designed to miss important context so that you still buy the codex.
Yeah.
If data cards had detachment rules in them, you wouldn't buy the codex. You wouldn't buy it.
That's fair.
Because you know what data cards are? Super useful. They're really good. In fact, the double-sized ones of 10th edition are so good. I have the Necron ones. They're so, but I don't have the detachment rules in there. I don't have the Necron Codex. Thank you, scary website. So I don't need it. But here's the thing, and I understand that Games Workshop probably already understands these websites exist. They'll never nip them in the bud. They'll never get rid of them. They know they exist. So they kind of go, we'll just do that if you don't want to buy the book. Oh, don't support us. They spit on me. But like, it's ridiculous, right? And I don't think it's an accident. I think there's a conspiratorial element. There's like a cynicism there where I'm like, they could just be stupid, but like, no, they're like top 10 grossing company in the whole damn world. They know what they're doing, and it's all trickling to get you to buy more. It is always trickling to get you to buy more. This is what I touched on when I talked about the Kill Team in our last episode, where I said, yeah, but Striking Scorpions are $30 more expensive because you're buying Kill Team rules that people worked hard on. And you want to pay those developers because they worked hard on those Kill Team rules.
Which is funny because the Striking Scorpion, like extra $30 that you're buying to get that kit on its own, has already been paid for.
Yeah.
In the army box that they released 3 months prior.
But you can't.
That
Hang on.
broke even.
But Dylan, you can't justify that. Dylan, come on.
Oh, that's...
At the end of the day, are you just going to go, oh, I'm just going to pay them now because they've been paid once? Oh, they've been paid. Whatever. They might as well stop making Kill Team rules, Dylan. They have been paid.
They're working for a company. I know
That
how
pays
contracting works.
Yeah, look, you and I know this, okay?
Yeah.
But this is the defense the Games Workshop can make. And we've gone off the deep end, not really talking about editions anymore. We've gone off the deep end, as we tend to do on this show. But
Okay, well, to pull it back to editions then, what are your thoughts on how Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or how Paizo has handled Pathfinder 2nd Edition Revised? Is that the sweet spot of edition updates? From my perspective, if you go, hey everyone, we're remastering these rules. We're revising them, right? There's going to be some updates. They're not going to be huge. There's only going to be some minor tweaks. We're clarifying a few things, streamlining a couple of processes to it. The books will look different. They won't look vastly different. They will look a little bit different. The core rule book, sorry. Not everything else.
Yes.
Because, everything else still works within the system because it's still Pathfinder 2e.
And we'll get back to that. I want to talk about that in a second.
We've stopped print. Whatever's out there now, we're expecting it to last. Revised edition will come out and they will replace these books.
Yeah.
And you are not forced to buy them to keep playing.
Correct.
Because, any of the changed elements will also just throw up online for you in case you need it, or a PDF version is available that's really cheap, which is something that Paizo does all the time. I applaud them for that. They understand the idea of digital distribution and the true efficiency gains it makes for your company.
Yes.
And passing that on to the consumer. But because people like books, people still buy the books. Do you think that, if Games Workshop came out tomorrow and said, hey everyone, we're updating the Oryx Walklands Battletome. There's some still out there in the wilds. If you want them, you can buy them. Up to you. But in 6 months' time, there will be a new version of the book that'll have the more grunters and the updated Our Boys profiles and the updated attachments related to all that and the updated, artifact rules.
Well, sure, but that's the new Battletome, right? Like, okay, can I take a step back, right? But what the important difference here, right? First of all, we talk about like Battletomes and codexes like their editions, which they're not, right? That's the first thing to talk about, right? That'd be like them saying, we've FAQ'd Xanathars and we're releasing Xanathars, right? That's closer to what the Battletome discussion is. But more importantly, right, what you said earlier about Pathfinder gets me, and this is what's really important, is that we're revising and we're fixing a couple of wording, we're streamlining the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rulebook. Everything you know from Pathfinder 2nd Edition will plug and play into this book, right? Yeah. The same way D&D 1 D&D or D&D 6th Edition will plug and play with all of the 5th Edition supplements, which is what they announced. We don't know if that's true, whatever. Hasbro. But what they announced, they'll plug and play. That's not what these editions do.
Yeah.
These editions demolish everything and say none of it plugs and play, right? So you have every option when you play. This is true. Every single time I play 10th edition 40k, I could say to Connor, do you want to play 4th edition Assault on Blackreach? And he could say, yeah. We'd have to find those rules because it's lost media. But if we found those rules, we could play them. 4th is a bit further back, Trent. We could play 8th edition, okay? I still have some of my old 8th edition books. We could play 8th edition. And that's a thing we always can do. However, we don't want to do that, right? Because I play with a lot of people, and fundamentally, a lot of those people want to stay up to date. They want to play the newer game. Not because necessarily it's even better. Again, 9th edition, a lot of people didn't like that. They weren't playing 8th. They were still playing 9th, or they just weren't playing Warhammer. Because people want to play the most recent thing. That's like almost like a core tenet of how these kind of games work. But nothing else works. So if you and I are playing 4th edition, we might have a bit of fun, but then I'm going to go, well, this didn't really, I didn't get to practice my faction or learn new interaction stuff for this game I'm playing currently. And when I go play this game currently, it's like we just played entirely different game. We might as well play anything because we weren't really playing compared to what I'm used to, which is not Warhammer.
There's also like the element of, how much do you retain? How much do you want to retain from an information perspective?
Exactly. That's a lot of more information. That's a whole game.
I still have edition confusion when I run D&D games.
Yes.
Like I still pull out D&D 4E rules because it was so ingrained to how I ran D&D and learned to play D&D because I'm a fourth edition person.
Sucks to suck, dude.
Yeah, sorry.
You can only use that ability once per day in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if I rest?
So there's times for 5 when
Okay.
I've been running 5th
session.
edition games where I've, basically thrown a 4th edition rule and then gone, oh, okay, sorry, that's, and I feel like I'm comfortable at a point now where I have easily removed nearly all of 4th edition from my brain space.
Well, even when we're playing like Star Wars D20, sometimes you'll say something from 5th edition.
Yeah.
Even then. And then we'll go, like, is that, and I'll be like, Blake will be like, is that true? And you'll go, and I'll go, that's true in 5th edition. And you go, oh, yeah. Yeah. And then we'll go back to the conversation.
Yeah.
Because you go, oh, of course it is. And that's the thing that happens, right? But again, right? This is because those things aren't plug and play. They're very different editions. And they're not very different games, but they're very different editions. And this is why I feel like the Pathfinder thing interests me and why I think it's elegant by definition is because it doesn't demolish things beforehand. It is update, errata, FAQ. It's
fixing
streamlined.
things that people had problems with.
But you could do this in a living document.
Yeah.
If your game was just a living document, which we haven't really spoken about at length, but we've touched on. 1 D&D. The whole point of the apparent 6th edition of D&D, the apparent 1 D&D, is that it's going to be forevermore a living document. How that will stand up, we will see. But again, if this succeeds as a living document, what does that look like for Warhammer in the future?
I mean, there's also the question of what does a living document of Dungeons and Dragons look like in an OGL world?
That's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
That is
You know what? I might actually see if I can get in contact with anyone from Paizo regarding Orc, because I would love to have a discussion about the creative licensing around things like Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs and to an extent minis as well.
and rule system. Because as far as I understand it, is that you can't copyright a rule set, but you can copyright a rule book and like how it's formatted.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
You cannot copyright mechanics, but you can copyright the presentation of those mechanics.
Yeah.
And more
So
importantly,
that's
you
why
copyright.
Pathfinder doesn't have Tash's hideous laughter.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. It's more importantly, it's the IP. Right, so it's the intellectual. It's what you create out of it. It's like you can't have beholders, right? That's an important thing. But you can have like creatures that are eye stalks. That have floating heads with like one eye and eye stalks. You just can't call them beholders or make them clear that they're anything like them.
Yeah, you just call them death skulls.
Death skulls. Like you can have jumping and flying as a mechanic. You just can't use, and that's the important one. Tasha's hideous laughter. You could do things like magical laughter.
Yeah.
And nobody can copyright magical laughter.
Cacophonous laughter.
Cacophonous laughter, exactly.
You just find
Tasha is a character within the universe of Dungeons and Dragons, and that's how it's copyrighted.
Yeah.
Again, this is what we see a lot in Age of Sigmar and 40k, where we don't get ogre kingdoms, we get ogre more tribes, because that's easier. We don't get the lizard men, we get Seraphon, because these names are copyrightable, whereas you can't copyright lizard men, and you can't copyright ogre.
You can't even copyright Eldar. That's
You
why
can't
they,
cop-
that's why
that's why they
Eldari.
became the Eldari, because yes, you cannot copyright Eldar. It's strange. It's a complicated soup, that one.
I also wanted to just touch on minor rule adjustments and stuff like that, especially in like a role playing context, like the rule of cool. Sometimes you can just agree with people at the table, just be like, oh, this rule's kind of like, how do we want to interpret it? And that happened a lot in the 6th and 7th edition era. When we talk about a lot of bloat. when the wording was so confusing and you constantly had to flip between your data, like your whatever it was, the
40K?
card.
Yeah,
Was that?
40K,
Yeah,
right.
40K. But just in general. And then going back and being like, all right, well, this is what the grav rule means, but it says this and it's quite obscuring. So can we just agree that on a 4-up, X happens? You
And
know?
this is true about like
Yeah.
any kind of casual gameplay.
Yeah.
But when you hit competitive gameplay, that's
goes
not
out the
going to
window.
happen.
No.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is you're going to go, judge, and
Yeah.
somebody's going to walk over and you're going to go, hey, this is the interaction we're having. I've had that discussion myself. I ran into a situation where I was versing a sister as a battle player, and he goes, okay, I move my sisters forward 6 inches. I then utilize the medic, to resurrect 2 of my melter guns. The melter guns themselves in the unit haven't moved, but the unit has moved. So the melter guns get their heavy benefit because they haven't moved. And I go, well, that just sounds wrong. And he goes, no, but literally, look what happened. I'm like, sure, but I reckon comprehensively that's not correct. So we went through the rules. We couldn't find any like definitive answer. And I was like, the unit has moved. End of discussion. He goes, yes, but the models haven't moved and heavy is on the model. I'm like, yes, but the unit has moved and they're part of the unit. So we call the judge over and the judge goes, so what's going on? I explain the situation. Judge goes, yeah, the unit's moved. Every model in the unit is a model in the unit. The unit has moved. They'd not get the heavy benefit. And that's like how that resolved.
Yeah.
Because I was like, and I could have been wrong. And he could have gone, no, those models haven't moved. And I would have to go, okay.
I think that really plays into how complex and nuanced the rules for mini war games can become.
And I don't blame the guy, by the way,
Yeah.
for coming to that
Yeah.
conclusion, because when he said, he's like, but look at what just happened. I'm like, I agree what just happened
Yeah.
makes sense to what you're saying. What you're saying, what just happened, that makes sense. However, I'm just going to go on a whim and say, that's not rules as intended. And I don't think you can abuse heavy weapons like that. Otherwise, I would know this by now. It's one of these things. I've been playing,
Otherwise,
And
my
it's-
Devastators would be really
I've played
dangerous.
hundreds of games. I think I would have run into this problem by now.
And you both learn something from that interaction
Exactly.
as well, which is also really important.
It's also really important. Now, that's also important, and I do totally agree. And this is another thing that's important. You talk about how it's like at the table, it's casual. You can't just like work out what you need to work out. The same way that if we're playing Star Wars Roll 20,
I was about to say.
we can introduce the Genesis Force dice to our games.
Yeah.
Because it's a casual game amongst friends. We do whatever we want. And Warhammer 40K is at its core a casual game amongst friends. It is a casual game, right? But these interactions and what we're talking about in the context of money making and pushing product, general's handbooks and competitive match play stuff, we're really not in the space of just talking about casual gameplay. We're not only talking about competitive gameplay, of course not. We're not only talking about that, but we are not talking about exclusively casual gameplay, which is where this becomes a bigger boiling pot and a bigger problem. And I think that in casual gameplay, I'm going to go back to Battletech now. In casual gameplay, you don't even need additions ever. Because in casual gameplay, you and I could still have our 4th edition stuff. Connor and I first played our first ever games in 4th edition. Well, maybe not your first ever games, but together we first played our first game 4th edition. I played quite a bit of 4th edition 40K actually. And I was very, very young. I don't really get it. If I played it today, I'd get it more. But again, we could just play that. That's our prerogative as adults. We could play whatever, we could do whatever we want. Now, this is true about any kind of thing. And I think Battletech is a great example of this. Because when I talk to Battletech players, I hear a lot of the rhetoric of like, there's a specific person I know, I'm not going to mention names now, who loves to go on about how Battletech has no additions and is just, Battletech is Battletech and it's so good, it doesn't need addition change. And I go, that is not true. Battletech is not that, it is not that good. Now, I don't even talk about him, no, I'm talking about somebody else. But anyway, it is not that good. It is that casual. It is not that good. And I want to make that very clear. It is that casual. It is a game that is exclusively that. Battletech played competitively is so garbage. And everyone I talk to who plays Battletech, they talk about how they're like, oh, we just don't play competitively at all. Like we just house rule you can't play that mech. We just say you can't play that mech. And if you do, you're like a douchebag.
It's like the social contract in Commander.
It's exactly the same.
That's how that game survives with the one set of rules because
Exactly.
the community self-polices what is acceptable in their pod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they don't, they are the kind of community that is interested in and okay by the broken nature of the competitive space and want to play the concise, like, there is this defined meta of this is all the best stuff that's all stupidly broken. And if you brought it against anyone friendly, right, it wouldn't be a fun game to play, but we're not in it for a fun game. We're in it for a tournament. And we've reevaluated what we determined as fun, and now we're having fun in our own respect because that's what we want to do with the game and the rule set. And maybe we're better off playing a different game, but I just like this because it's very unique to me. It's like Battletech competitive to me feels like Shrek Super Slam on the Wii competitive, where it's like, let me finish. Let him cook. where it's
Let him cook.
where it's like the game is so hideously broken that it becomes like its own form of entertainment, and that becomes like its own form of interesting, where you kind of completely leapt past the idea that it's a game for fun and for kids. You've just leapt clean over this, and you're like, no, I need to min-max everything about this. And it's a very interesting environment when you get into the nuts of it all. So, and I think that's an important thing to talk about. And even casually, 40K is not a super casual game. Even casually, Age of Sigmar is not a super casual game. So these games feel like they benefit from more from additions. However, just like every other game, like its kin, if we moved over to in a perfect world, let's say Warhammer didn't have additions, right? And Age of Sigmar 1 was just the way Age of Sigmar was, right? People would play it. Maybe it wouldn't be as popular as Battletech. That's not for reasons necessarily of its game quality. It may not be popular Battletech, but people would just play it and they would just house rule things. They would just have that same social contract. If 40K was played only in first edition forever, like Rogue Trader, it would just get, like, people just have a social contract because it's a casual game.
So I remember this vividly because I was working an AOS tournament back in like first edition. There was a bit of a social contract when it came to, well, the rules they stated that you had to measure combat from the model at any point on the model. But everybody just agreed, well, that gets really muddy and it kind of feels bad if you've got a big, like, Archaon who has a huge wingspan, and you'd be like, oh, well, I can draw it from this point here. I am within the 3, so you have to pile into me. Rather than just being like, if you're 3 inches of the base, let's just go by the base.
Yeah. But then,
Yeah.
this is interesting, right? Because you're talking about HMR first, where they had that social contract.
Yeah.
At a Teams event 40K I went to recently, okay? I was drawing line of sight from a Riptide to another Riptide in a Tau 1v1, right? And I was drawing line of sight. I was like, yeah, I think, because I use a laser, I was like, yeah, I think I have this. And he goes, can you determine that you have this? And I'm like, yep, I'm holding the laser, right? What's wrong? And he goes, the laser's not touching your model. And I'm like, if this mouse is the model, the laser's here. The laser is over a third of my model. And he goes, it's not touching your model. And I'm like, isn't it? And he goes, yeah, it's just touching your base. But it needs to touch your model because the rules say model to model. And I'm like, are you joking? And he goes, no. I'm like, well, it's my base. Like,
Base is
part of the model. And he goes, well, no. In the core rules, base is not part of the model. They're just different entities. So your model can lean over your base, but not vice versa. Like, that's not how that works. Your base does not count as part of your model. I'm like, okay, but my model is everything on the base, correct? He's like, yes. And I'm like, yep, including the rubble. So that's going to be part of my model. And he goes, okay. So he calls a judge over. The judge is like, okay, this is a bit of a muddy situation because you're both technically correct.
Bit of a muddy situation for all that rubble on your base.
For that rubble on your base.
Sterling mud.
And he goes, it's a bit of a weird situation. And I'm like, so you're telling me, and my jetpack goes way over the back of my base. So if my model was flipped around and was like backing up like an SUV, backing up like an SUV, it would have seen that instantly. There wouldn't have been even a question. So I'm like, here, can you just like see, I'm not gonna touch my model. Can you see if the tip of my toe at least, because my model is left leg right out reaching in front of him and he's leaning back with a gun about to fire, right? So I'm like, can you see my toe can see his like edge of his banner? And he goes, yeah, the toe can see the banner though. So that's like technically in any way. So that resolves everything. So I could just, as we were having this discussion, I looked at it and went, oh, actually. So that resolved the entire discussion anyway. But we didn't come to that conclusion anyway. It became like this reverse problem. So when you talk about this kind of context of even at an AOS tournament, they were having these kind of like fun interactions. They're having this kind of like, rules is written versus rules is intended. Let's just say that Archaon can't do that. And I can understand, especially when you look at his like overhanging wingspan and you're measuring like combat, that makes things very strange.
Yeah.
I can totally agree that's a mess. This is like obviously different examples. So there's like, it's like shooting a line down, it's shooting an ion cannon down like an eye of a needle. So it's a whole thing. But it's all a abstraction of war anyway. Yeah. It's interesting that in 40K goes the other direction. It's interesting that it's like, no, we have to work out rules as written as much as possible. Now that's obviously just one interaction I've had, and that's like, I've had more interactions like it, but I don't want to say all of my interactions represent the entire game state and everyone who plays the game, because it's not true. But it is important to mention that it is interesting how these things kind of go.
I do find it really interesting that the judge can say, well, technically you're both correct. To a ruling that's like, actually, you need to tell us which one of us is correct.
Sorry, so while I was eyeing this out, he was trying to work out the issue. He didn't just walk away. I should add to the story. He pulled out the rule book and he was looking on his phone. He was trying to work out what we can do. He was trying to work out whether basing counts as part of the model, which when I said it, I kind of knew I was bit. Like when I said I was like
Buying time.
I was like buying time so I could work out something, but I was like, can you just work out that's true? Because then by definition I could just do the thing. And he was like, well, everything on the base is the model. That's like a whole question. And then I'm like, if I put extra plastic on my base, then does that become the model? Is what I then opened up with. I had this whole discussion back and forth. So it became like a
So you create a signpost out of sprue. Bam.
yeah, out of sprue. And I'm like, bam, that's part of the model now because it's not basing. It's sprue, it's Games Workshop plastic, and it's part of my model. Also, I just put spikes on my knees that shoot out super far out and I go, that's part of my model. Like
It
there's
looks
a term,
atrocious, but it's
atrocious.
functional.
Technically, it says modeling for advantage. There's a term called modeling for advantage, or MFA, which is saying that like you specifically build your model in a way that benefits it. So, for example, that Riptide has an MFA, which people would argue is bad gamesmanship because when I built it, now this was not in my goal was not to make it better in gameplay. I just wanted to do this. I cut it into its legs, and instead of having it standing upright with its just gun out, I had it leaning right down to the ground, about to fire an ion shot. Right. So I had it leaning so far down that it's actually about a good 1.5 to 2 inches shorter than it should be. So we can hide behind terrain better. So you could argue my model is MFA as well. So, you know, there's other companies like Corvus Belli Infinity and such that have different rules around like the model to model. They just go like, there's an invisible cylinder that rises from its base, and that's its.
Warmahordes had that.
Yeah,
was
Warmahordes has it too.
perfect.
Invisible cylinder that goes up from its base. That's what its model is. I think that's obviously perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. However, you know, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah.
Again, really going away from editions conversation, but
yeah,
all these things start to happen because these games are very comprehensive, and that's why they want to do new editions. However, again, if these editions feel so competitively driven, and they feel so money driven, and here's the thing. Here's the irony of all this conversation, right? Here's the almost hypocrisy, I would say. I'm still excited for new AOS.
Yeah.
That's the hypocrisy of this, right? It's
I
like,
hate
I
that.
hate that. It's a bad taste, I'm about to say. It's like, I'm still going, I'll probably get the new AOS and play a bunch of it. And you know what's going to happen? When new AOS drops, I'm going to drop 3rd edition like a hot rock. I'm going to play 3rd. I'm going to play 4th edition.
No
of course
one's
not.
with you anymore.
Yeah, it's like, Toy Story 2, like, I don't want to play with you anymore.
3rd edition.
Yeah, exactly. So, and, you know, again, it's like, even like, Warhammer doesn't do this with all their games as well. Like, I don't think Underworld has had a 2nd edition.
No.
So it's not like they do it with all their games.
I mean, Rivals decks.
But that, again, you could argue that's a 0.5.
That's a 0.5. And also that's a good example of like a more living edition.
Well, I was just thinking too, right? Like, if we go back to that rotation discussion we had a couple of weeks back, where is that kind of also editions?
It's a really, I saw this parallel as well. I want you to mention this because I saw this parallel as well.
Yeah.
It's very much like a standard rotation.
But the additions as well, when it comes to card stuff, there's another argument around rules bloat for design, right?
This is also important.
There was actually there was a really good ban and restricted announcement for Flesh and Blood.
Let me just pull it back here again.
Yeah,
Oh,
back
God.
here.
No, we almost had 2 episodes in a row where Dylan didn't talk about Flesh and Blood.
Yeah. But
Can you believe it?
Flesh and
But they had a ban and restricted announcement
Flesh and Blood Club.
a couple of days back, and they banned Berserk from the game because the new set has a Berserker in it or something like that.
Mega Berserk.
A KO. There's a new KO in one of the recent sets. It's like a Berserker class that would use Berserk, and they got sick of trying to design with that card in mind because it became such a, like, not a big problem, but enough of an issue in the recent sets that they were like,
Well, can I? Sorry, you're absolutely right. In this exact example, can you go? How far back do these documents go? By the way, does it go back to like it's the original age of Flesh and Blood? Like how far? Not this specific.
Yeah.
Can you go right back? Can you go to the banner? Like I think it's the first ever ban in Flesh and Blood. The first ever ban in Flesh and Blood, by the way. I can't remember the name of this card, but I was playing it, and it was a card that was like for 6 generic. Sorry, for 6 damage, you would play it. I think it was 2 resources to play it. You'd play it. It would hit your opponent. When it resolved, it would go back to the top of your deck, back to the bottom of your deck. We'll see if we can find it.
It wasn't like Seeds of Agony or some shit.
No. That's a whole different question. Seeds of Agony was really bad. No. Let's have a look. Here we go.
18th of March. Drone of Brutality?
Drone of Brutality. Bring up Drone of Brutality. So Drone of Brutality was banned for the same reason. it created so many fundamental problems with game health. They had to design everything around it. And they were like, this card isn't broken. This card's like kind of okay. So this card said, if Drone of Brutality, that's right.
Yeah.
If Drone of Brutality be put into your graveyard from anywhere, instead put it on the bottom of your deck. And for 2 generic, it costs 6 and blocked for 2, whatever. Brute decks would discard the red version of this card because it did 6 damage, and that's a 6 damage card, rada, doesn't matter, and get benefit from it, and then it would tuck itself. But towards the very end of the game, when you only had drones, and you played drones and bottom deck drones and played drones and bottom deck drones and played drones, it wasn't very strong, but it was just like you couldn't deck out. You couldn't burn them out.
Like you had a permanent effectiveness to
You
the
had
game.
a permanent
Rhino
effectiveness to the
loves
game.
this.
So it became, what's that?
Rhino loves this.
Yeah, Rhino loves this.
Yes.
So what ended up happening was like, they went, this is bad for game health. We can't keep designing around this. We're just going to ban it. Yeah, it's not like fundamentally the strongest card in the game, but it is probably the most broken card in the base set. It's the most broken card of the base set because it's just doing too much. And 5 sets down the line, I promise you this card is broken. They basically said that. It's like 5 sets down the line, we're going to break this card. We can't rely on building around it.
And that's exactly what they're saying. In a vacuum, a Berserk ban looks somewhat absurd. Not to discount a Sterling performance who took Berserk Rhinar to top 4 finish in Philadelphia. But Berserk sightings have been quite rare in Classic Constructed since the start of Heavy Hitters, which is their most recent set. However, Berserk has eaten up a tremendous amount of development time since it first appeared back in Dynasty. So, like...
The Rhino is just broken.
Rhino, very fun. Very fun, very good.
Yeah, so it looks like that, like... I guess rotations, like standard rotation formats, as well as banned and restricted announcements, are kind of edition changes as well, for the same sense of they're changing the game and making it easier for design bloat to no longer be an issue. Because if you look at an edition change to Warhammer, like we got Warhammer Age of Sigmar because the rules designers were like, there's no way we can deal with Warhammer Fantasy anymore.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think when it comes to standard rotation, I agree with you more. I think with banned and restricted, we're getting closer to like FAQ and errata. We're getting close to like, like for example, there was a ban in 40k fairly recently. The Necron Codex came out, and there was a rule where it said, okay, so I'm not going to explain everything, but basically, if you had a crypt deck in a unit, you would use this ability on the crypt deck. The whole unit had the crypt deck keywords, the whole unit would benefit and make their guns obscenely powerful. Like, these guns are like anti-infantry guns, and I did to a friend, which maybe I shouldn't have, but anyway, I did to a friend.
The errata wasn't out yet.
The errata wasn't out yet, and I used it against a friend. I was like, I think this is very strong. And then I did 19 damage to his 24 wound Bane Blade. 19 damage in one shooting. I almost one-shot the tankiest thing in the freaking game, basically, with guns that he had, by the way, 19 of those wounds, he had no response to.
Oh.
So he had 19 of those, he had no response to. I did more wounds than that he could answer, but I did 19 uninterruptible damage. Now, for example, Bellicor would have also taken that much damage if he was playing it. It's a different army. And Bellicor is like the undivided Demon Prince, one of the first Demon Princes ever. I think he's the first Demon Prince. Insanely powerful character in all of Warhammer, 40k and HCMR combined, and I would have one-shot him with anti-infantry piddly guns because of this rule. And it was so obscenely incredible that they went, yes. So when we said crypt deck unit, we meant crypt deck model. So then if I picked that unit for the ability, only the crypt deck model got it, and his gun is literally like useless. It's like a little like, pew! So it didn't do anything. Now, obviously, they didn't mean to make crypt deck model. They knew what they were doing. They wanted this ability very powerful. However, externally, they didn't realize how incredibly oppressive this ability would be. So they went, okay, well, we're going to just like make it useless. We made a mistake there. We should have made it very useless to begin with. But anyway, so point being is, errata and FAQ feel more like bannings to me because you can't just like in a physical card game, errata, Drone of Brutality, not say that.
Yeah.
You might as well ban it. Nobody's going to play it after that. You might as well ban it.
Yeah. And then they do Alchemy, and now Oko Thief of Crowns is playable again. So everyone feels better about it. So they're reprinting it in a new set.
Dylan.
Yeah, Magic.
Dylan. Alchemy? We can get into the alchemy discussion.
No, we'll have that discussion later.
Okay,
I
we'll
feel like
different.
I'm looking at the time.
Check in next episode when we talk about
when Trent
alchemy.
Doesn't stop talking about alchemy.
Isn't
Arena great? Anyway, let us know in the comments, by the way, what are your thoughts on editions? Should they still exist? Are they worthwhile? What has been one of the big... Give us a story from you about, like...
Edition changes.
What happened when an edition changed for you in a game, and did that make the game better for you, for worse? Why? What did all that happen? We
Did your
want to
army
hear.
change?
We want to hear your thoughts on this. We give our uninterrupted thoughts. We'd like to hear yours.
Yes, it means a lot. We read all the comments. Please like and subscribe. It means the world to us. It's so, so important. We don't ask for anything else. We're not asking for money. We're not asking anything. Just a quick like and subscribe would mean the world to us. If you really like listening to us here at From the Vault, we appreciate you guys. And subscribing will just let you know whenever we go live. You get to watch these episodes as they go live or in your own time that is in your subscriptions channel. This is true with Spotify and with YouTube. We really appreciate you guys. Also, let us know in the comments if we should stick to the topic and discussion and not go on tangents all the time, because this episode was a mess, but we did our best for you guys. We tend to go off. Dylan, put it in the chat if you don't want to hear Dylan talk about Flesh and Blood anymore. Put it in the comment section.
It wasn't a rant this time.
Like,
it was a good thing.
Dylan's like grinding his teeth like it wasn't a rant this time.
It was something
They
it
did
was
it good.
props. They
They
did
did it
something good.
No, it's bad. Flesh and Blood for you is like 6th and 7th edition Warhammer for me. It's like that. It's the most traumatizing thing you can think of on the tabletop.
It's
You're
fine.
like,
It's
fuck
fine.
him.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah,
It's
it's
fine.
fine.
He's fine. He's
It's
fine.
fine.
Anyway,
Thanks so
7th
much
edition.
for joining us. Thank you, Connor, behind
thank
the
you so
camera.
much,
as
Connor. We
always.
appreciate it. We didn't thank you last episode because we're bad people, so we're going to
So we're
thank you
gonna
twice.
thank you again.
Thank you, Connor.
Oh, I love it in tandem. Makes me feel special.
Yeah,
And
special.
thank
That
you for
camera.
sticking out with us this long. Stay safe, everyone.
And wash your goddamn hands.
Wash your goddamn hands.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 I'm too tired to formulate points.